Security laughed at the old man's gun permit until the rangemaster saw his sniper qualification. AOR, the precision point. Shooting range occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town, where the sound of gunfire was isolated enough not to disturb neighbors and close enough to the highway to draw weekend warriors and tactical enthusiasts from 3 counties over. Inside, the air smelled of gun oil, brass, and the particular chemical residue that comes from thousands of rounds fired in enclosed spaces, despite the best ventilation systems money could buy. Thomas Harker stood at the front counter, waiting with the patience of someone who'd learned long ago that everything took longer than it should. He was 76 years old, though he carried himself with the posture of a man 20 years younger. His shoulders were straight, his movements economical, and his eyes, pale gray and remarkably steady, tracked the room with unconscious precision. He wore simple clothes, khaki pants, a navy blue windbreaker over a white polo shirt, and running shoes that had seen better days, but were meticulously clean. In his hands, he held his gun permit and a worn leather case containing his personal sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 that had been maintained with obsessive care. Behind the counter, Chad Morrison was having what he considered a hilarious conversation with his coworker, Brent. Chad was 24, built like someone who spent serious time in the gym, and wearing a precision point polo that was at least one size too small to better display his physique. His blonde hair was styled with product, and his teeth were unnaturally white when he smiled. "Dude, check out the permit on this guy," Chad said, not quite quietly enough, tilting the document so Brent could see. "Issue date 1973. This thing's older than my parents." Brent, equally young and equally convinced of his own expertise, leaned over to look. "No way, that's like vintage. Does it even still work? Are there expiration dates on gun permits?" "It's current," Thomas said quietly. "Renewed every 5 years as required by state law." Chad looked up, startled that the old man had heard him, then recovered with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, hey, no disrespect, sir. Just don't see a lot of permits this old still in circulation. Most people, upgrade to the new digital systems." "I prefer paper," Thomas said simply. "Yeah, I can see that." Chad began entering information into the computer, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. "So, what brings you in today, Mr.?" He glanced at the permit. "Harker, looking to do some plinking? We've got lanes available and we rent everything from 22s to 44 Magnums if you want to try something with a little more kick. I brought my own weapon. I'd like to use the 100-yard rifle range if it's available." Chad's eyebrows rose. "The rifle range? Sir, that's usually reserved for our more advanced shooters. We've got a liability thing. Have you done much long-distance shooting?" Thomas's expression didn't change. Some, Chad repeated, exchanging a glance with Brent that said, "Old guy thinks he's Clint Eastwood." "Okay, well, we'll need to do a quick safety qualification first. Just standard procedure. Make sure you're comfortable with range commands, basic firearms, safety, that kind of thing." "I understand." Cool. Let me just pull up the waiver and..." Chad stopped, frowning at his screen. "Huh? That's weird. Your permit's flagged in the system." Thomas went very still, a subtle shift that someone observant might have noticed. "Flagged how?" "Not sure. Just says there's a note in your file. Hang on, let me get my supervisor." Chad disappeared into the back office, leaving Thomas standing at the counter with Brent, who had pulled out his phone and was scrolling through social media. The range was moderately busy for a Thursday afternoon. In the lanes visible through the reinforced glass partition, shooters of varying skill levels worked through their practice. Some were clearly experienced, their movements efficient and controlled. Others were newer, their stances uncertain, their shots scattered across targets that would never return fire. Thomas watched them with the detached interest of someone evaluating data. He noted grip pressure, breathing patterns, anticipation flinches. Decades of observation had made it automatic, a background process that ran whether he wanted it to or not. Chad returned with a man in his 30s wearing a supervisor badge. "Mr. Harker, I'm Kyle Brennan, shift supervisor. Chad says your permit's showing a flag in our system. Do you know what that might be about?" "I don't know." Kyle had pulled up the same screen, reading it with a furrowed brow. "It's not a red flag or anything like that. Your permit's valid, background check is clean. There's just a notation. Says to contact rangemaster before authorizing long-distance shooting privileges." He looked up. Did you maybe have an incident at another range? Sometimes that kind of thing gets shared between facilities. No incidents, Thomas said calmly. Okay, weird. Well, our rangemaster's actually here today, which is lucky. Usually he only comes in weekends. Let me see if he's available. Kyle picked up the phone on the counter, punched a few numbers. Hey Joe, you got a minute up front? Got a customer with an interesting notation on his permit. Yeah? Thomas Harker? Uh-huh. Really? Okay, yeah, I'll tell him. Kyle hung up, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. He's coming right up. Chad leaned against the counter, clearly enjoying the drama. Maybe you're secretly famous or something, he said to Thomas with a grin that was meant to be friendly but landed closer to condescending. Like gun YouTuber, Instagram influencer, Grandpa's Guide to the Glock? I'm not on social media, Thomas said. Nobody's not on social media, Brent interjected, not looking up from his phone. Thomas didn't respond to that. He simply waited, his hands loose at his sides, his breathing slow and even. The posture of someone who had learned patience in hard schools, where waiting might mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The door to the back offices opened, and a man emerged who commanded immediate attention despite not being particularly imposing. Joe Castillo was 52 years old, compact and solid, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes that had seen their share of serious work. He wore jeans, a precision point polo identical to the others, and the kind of no-nonsense expression that came from years of being responsible for other people's safety. He crossed the lobby in quick strides, his gaze locked on Thomas Harker, and when he was 10 feet away, he stopped dead. For a long moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Thomas's expression remained neutral, polite. But Joe's face had gone through several rapid transformations: surprise, recognition, disbelief, and finally something approaching awe. Holy shit, Joe said quietly. Then louder. Holy shit, Tom Harker? Joe Castillo, Thomas acknowledged. It's been a while. A while? It's been 23 years. Joe closed the remaining distance and extended his hand. Thomas shook it, and Joe's grip was firm, almost desperate. The handshake of someone grasping onto something he'd thought lost to history. I can't believe. When the system flagged your name, I thought it had to be a coincidence. Thomas Harker is not exactly unique. But then they said it was an old permit, original issue 73, and I thought, no way, it can't be. Chad and Brent were watching this interaction with confused fascination. Kyle, the supervisor, looked equally baffled. Joe, Kyle ventured, you want to fill us in? Joe didn't take his eyes off Thomas. This man, he said slowly, is the reason I'm alive. This man is the reason 12 Marines made it home from Helmand Province when, by all rights, we should have died in a valley that doesn't appear on any official maps. The lobby had gone very quiet. Even Brent had stopped scrolling. This man, Joe continued, his voice thickening with emotion, is one of the finest snipers who ever lived, and you idiots were about to make him take a safety qualification test. ASTI 2. Joe Castillo had asked them to close the 100-yard rifle range for the next hour. The request was made with such absolute authority that Kyle hadn't even questioned it, just made the announcement over the intercom and politely redirected the two shooters who had been using it. Now, Thomas stood in lane 5, assembling his rifle with movements so practiced they looked like meditation. The rifle case had held a Remington 700 in .308 Winchester, old but immaculately maintained, its action smooth as silk, its barrel showing the kind of care that spoke to thousands of hours of attention. The scope was a Leupold Mark IV, older generation but still perfectly functional, mounted with custom rings that had been fitted with precision. Joe stood beside him, Kyle and Chad watching from the observation area behind the shooting line. Brent had been sent back to the front counter with clear instructions to handle check-ins and stop being an idiot in that order. How long has it been since you've shot? Joe asked quietly. At distance, about 6 months. I try to get out quarterly, keep the skills from completely deteriorating. Thomas worked a patch through the barrel, checking for any fouling or obstruction, then set it aside. The eyes aren't what they were. The hands are still steady, but the eyes... You're 76 years old, Joe said. You're allowed to have imperfect eyes. Tell that to the target. Joe laughed, the sound carrying genuine warmth. You know, when I got out and opened this range, I put a flag in the system for your name. Figured it was maybe a 1 in a million chance you'd ever walk in here, but I wanted to know if you did. Wanted the chance to say thank you properly. Thomas loaded a magazine with 5 rounds of federal gold medal match ammunition, his movements economical and precise. You thanked me in Helmand. That was sufficient. The hell it was. Joe's voice dropped lower, intimate. Chad's an idiot, but he's young. He doesn't know what he's looking at. But I do. So, let me ask you straight. What are you doing here, Tom? This is a civilian range in a mid-sized town. You could shoot at any military facility, any private range, anywhere in the country. People like you, they don't just walk into commercial ranges. Thomas was quiet for a moment, settling behind the rifle, checking the scope adjustments, his cheek finding the stock like coming home. I stopped shooting at military facilities 7 years ago. Too many questions, too many people who wanted stories. I come to places like this because nobody knows who I am. Nobody asks. I'm just another old man with a gun permit and time to kill. Except you're not. Except I'm not, Thomas agreed. But most of the time, people don't look close enough to notice. He settled into position, prone, bipod deployed, body alignment perfect, despite the passage of decades. His breathing slowed, deepened, fell into the rhythm that shooters chased and only the best truly found. Behind him, Kyle whispered something to Chad that Thomas's focused hearing didn't catch. What are you shooting for today? Joe asked. Just maintenance. Keep the fundamentals sharp. 5 rounds at 100 yards. See where I'm at. What group are you hoping for? Thomas's eye found the scope, the target downrange coming into sharp focus. Under an inch would be acceptable. Under an inch at 76 years old with equipment that's 20 years out of date would be exceptional, Joe corrected. But I'm guessing you don't do acceptable. Thomas didn't answer. He was entering that space now, that place of absolute concentration where the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat and the tiny movements of crosshairs over target. His finger found the trigger, took up the slack with pressure so gradual it was almost geological. The first shot surprised even him. Not the recoil, which he rode perfectly, but the pure rightness of it. The rifle spoke, the report echoing in the enclosed space, and downrange the target showed a hole exactly where he'd aimed, dead center. He cycled the bolt, brass ejecting in a gleaming arc, and settled again. Breath. Heartbeat. The spaces between them where time slowed and the world stood still. The second shot followed the first, the hole on the target so close to the original that at 100 yards they appeared to touch. Jesus! Chad breathed from the observation area. Thomas didn't hear him. He was already on shot 3, then 4, then 5. Each one a study in consistency, in muscle memory that decades couldn't erase, in fundamentals so deeply ingrained they function below conscious thought. When the 5th round left the barrel and the bolt locked back empty, Thomas engaged the safety and stood slowly, his knees protesting slightly from the prone position. Joe was already moving to the target retrieval system, bringing the paper target forward on its motorized carrier. When it reached the shooting line, all 4 men leaned in to examine it. The 5 shots formed a group measuring .63 inches center to center. At 100 yards, with iron-sighted rifles, most trained military marksmen would be happy with 2 inches. With optics, 1 inch was the standard for expert. Thomas Harker, at 76 years old, with a rifle older than the range's employees, had just put 5 rounds into a space smaller than a dime. Holy fuck, Kyle said softly. Joe turned to Chad and Kyle, his expression serious. You two need to understand something. What you just witnessed is mastery, not good shooting, not great shooting, mastery. There are maybe 50 people alive who can shoot like that, and most of them are active-duty military or competitive shooters in their prime. This man is old enough to be your grandfather, and he just demonstrated a level of precision that most shooters will never achieve in their entire lives. Chad looked pale. Mr. Harker, I'm sorry. I was disrespectful. I didn't realize... You didn't know, Thomas said simply, beginning to break down his rifle for cleaning. And I didn't tell you. There's no apology necessary. The hell there isn't, Joe said. There's knowing you don't know, and there's assuming someone's incompetent based on their age. 2 very different things. He turned back to Thomas. You got time for a coffee? There's a break room in back. I'd like to catch up if you're willing. Thomas considered this, then nodded. All right. They left Chad and Kyle with the rifle, and strict instructions on how to handle it, and moved to the break room, a small space with a coffee maker, a table, and chairs that had seen better days. Joe poured 2 cups, added sugar to his own, and sat down across from Thomas. "So," Joe said, 23 years. Fill in some blanks for me. What happened after Helmand?" Thomas wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, feeling its warmth. "Continued in service. Iraq again, then Syria, then places that don't have names in the briefings. Retired in 2017 at 70, mandatory age out. They'd have kept me longer if the regulations allowed it. Wife? Kids? Divorced. 86. She tried, but..." Thomas shrugged. "The deployments were too much. The things I couldn't talk about were too much. We stayed friendly. She remarried, had a good life, died 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. So am I. She deserved better than what I gave her." Thomas sipped his coffee. "I had a daughter from that marriage, Sarah. She's 42 now, lives in Seattle, works in tech. We talk every few weeks. She knows I was military, knows I did specialized work, doesn't know the details, doesn't ask. That's something. It's more than some have." Thomas set down his cup. "What about you? You said you got out, opened this range?" Joe nodded. "After Helmand, I did 2 more tours, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. Too many close calls, too many friends who didn't make it. The valley where you pulled us out, that changed me. Made me realize how lucky I was to be alive. So I got out in '06, used my savings and a VA loan to buy this place, turned it into something I could be proud of. It's not saving lives, but it's teaching people to respect firearms, to understand safety, to appreciate the discipline. That's important work. Not as important as what you did." Thomas met his eyes. "Joe, I need you to understand something. What I did in Helmand, what I did in all those places, that wasn't heroic. That was my job. I was good at it. And being good at it meant other people lived. But every round I fired, every target I eliminated, that was a life ended. A person who maybe had family, had friends, had a story. I don't lose sleep over it anymore, but I don't celebrate it either." The weight of that confession settled between them. "The valley," Joe said quietly. "Can you tell me what it looked like from your perspective? I've always wondered." Thomas was silent for a long moment, then began to speak. Axta 3. "You were 3 clicks inside hostile territory when the ambush happened," Thomas said, his voice taking on the measured cadence of a briefing. 12 Marines, 2 Humvees, moving through what intelligence said was a clear route. Except intelligence was wrong, or bought, or both. Joe nodded slowly, remembering. "We realized it the second the RPG hit the lead vehicle. The valley walls just lit up with muzzle flashes. Taliban, at least 40 of them, positioned on the high ground. We were in a kill box. I was positioned 700 meters north-northwest, on a ridge that technically didn't exist according to official maps." Thomas's eyes had gone distant, seeing something 23 years past. "My spotter and I had been tracking a high-value target for 3 days. Different operation, different objective. But we heard the explosion, saw the ambush develop. Command couldn't send air support for another 20 minutes. QRF was 30 minutes out. You didn't have 30 minutes. We had maybe 5 before they overran our position," Joe confirmed. "Johnson was already dead from the RPG. Martinez and Liu were hit, bleeding out. The rest of us were pinned down, taking fire from 3 sides. I counted 43 hostiles in that initial assessment," Thomas said. "Dug in, coordinated, well-equipped. They had you zeroed. Every time one of your Marines tried to return fire, 3 or 4 weapons would concentrate on that position." He paused, sipping his coffee. "I called it into my command, asked for authorization to engage. They said negative. Our mission was surveillance only. Breaking cover would compromise the larger operation." Joe's eyes widened. "You were ordered not to help us?" "I was ordered not to help you," Thomas confirmed. "But orders are written by people who aren't watching Marines die in real time. So I made a choice. Told my spotter to start calling targets, told command we were weapons-free whether they liked it or not, and started working. The break room was absolutely quiet, except for the distant sound of gunfire from the active ranges. First shot was their machine gun position, Eastern Ridge, 640 meters. Thomas continued, his voice flat, clinical. The gunner dropped, the next man picked up the weapon, he dropped, the third man was smarter, tried to relocate, caught him mid-movement. That suppressed their primary support weapon. "I remember," Joe said softly. "We couldn't figure out what was happening. The machine gun just stopped. Then the mortarmen stopped. Then the RPG team. It was like someone was turning off lights in a house, one room at a time. 16 targets eliminated in the first 4 minutes. All confirmed kills, all clean shots. My spotter was feeding me corrections, tracking wind, identifying threats by priority. There was a sniper on the western ridge, about 800 meters, who had your position zeroed. He was looking for me, knew someone was picking apart his team, but he was searching in the wrong sector. I put him down while he was scanning with his scope. Thomas's hands were steady on the coffee cup, but his eyes had taken on that 1,000-yard stare that combat veterans knew too well. By minute 7, they understood they were being engaged from distance. They started to withdraw, moving up the valley. Bad decision. Retreating in the open, panic setting in, discipline breaking down. I worked through the rest of the magazine, then a second, then a third. When they finally disappeared into the caves, I'd eliminated 31 of the original 43. 31, Joe repeated numbly. In less than 10 minutes. 9 minutes, 43 seconds, according to my spotter's log. We provided cover until your QRF arrived, then exfiltrated before anyone could identify us. The official report listed it as Taliban infighting, possible rival faction engagement. Your Marines were credited with exceptional defense under fire. My team was never mentioned. And you went back to tracking your HVT? Found him 2 days later, mission successful. Thomas's voice was flat, emotionless. Received a commendation that went into a file nobody will ever read. Moved on to the next operation. Joe leaned back in his chair, processing this. So you just saved 12 lives, killed 31 enemy combatants, and went back to work like it was Tuesday. It was Tuesday, Thomas said quietly. And those 31 enemy combatants, they weren't abstracts to me, Joe. Each one was a decision. Each one was a trigger pull. Each one was a person who stopped existing because I was good at my job. He met Joe's eyes. I don't regret it. You and your Marines deserve to go home. Those men were trying to kill you, and I stopped them. But I remember every single shot, every single face in the scope before the crosshairs settled. That's the cost of this kind of precision, you remember? Do you... Joe hesitated. Do you still see them? Sometimes, usually not in nightmares anymore, just in quiet moments. I'll be doing something ordinary, grocery shopping, mowing the lawn, and I'll remember a particular shot, a particular target. The way someone moved, the expression on their face before they dropped. It doesn't haunt me the way it did 20 years ago, but it's there, always there. The coffee had gone lukewarm between them. Outside the break room, the range continued its normal operations, people firing at paper targets that would never fire back, practicing for scenarios they hoped would never come. I built a good life after I got out, Joe said after a long silence. Married Kelly, you'd like her. 2 kids, teenagers now, driving me crazy in the best way. I coached Little League, went to PTA meetings, became a normal person doing normal things. But every year on the anniversary of that ambush, I think about you. About the ghost on the ridge who saved us. I used to wonder if you were even real, if maybe we'd imagined some of it in the chaos. I'm real, Thomas said, just not very interesting outside of what I could do with a rifle. That's bullshit and you know it. Joe's voice was firm. You made a choice that day. You disobeyed orders to save lives. That's not about marksmanship. That's about character. Thomas looked down at his hands, still steady, still capable, still carrying the muscle memory of thousands of trigger pulls. I made that choice a lot over the years. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. The ones that didn't work out, those are the ones that weigh heavier. What do you mean? There were other situations, other times when I had targets in my scope and had to make decisions about who lived and who died. Sometimes the intel was bad. Sometimes the situation was more complex than headquarters understood. Sometimes... He trailed off, then continued. Mosul, 2004, I had a confirmed HVT in my scope. Insurgent leader, responsible for multiple IED attacks, American deaths, clean shot, perfect conditions. But he was standing next to a child, a girl, maybe 8 years old. Intel said he used kids as shields, that he'd move eventually. Command said, wait for a clean shot. Joe waited, sensing where this was going. I waited 43 minutes, Thomas said softly. Maintained position, watched, waited for him to separate from the child. Then a patrol, ours, came around the corner. He shot the little girl himself, used her body as cover while he engaged our guys, killed 2 soldiers before I could put him down. Thomas's jaw worked. If I'd taken the shot earlier, ignored protocol, the girl might have died from my bullet. but she definitely died from his, and so did 2 Americans who didn't have to. That's not on you, Joe said firmly. Isn't it? I was the one with the rifle. I was the one who could have changed the outcome. I followed orders, followed protocol, and 3 people died who might have lived if I'd made a different choice. Or the bullet could have gone through him into the child, and you'd be carrying that instead. Maybe, probably, but I don't get to know. I just get to remember what did happen and wonder about what might have been different. Thomas finished his cold coffee in one swallow. That's the real cost of this work, Joe. Not the targets you drop, the ones you don't. The choices you make and the ones you don't make. All of it matters. All of it stays with you. They sat in the weight of that truth. 2 men separated by years and experience, but connected by the understanding of what it meant to make life and death decisions in the space of a heartbeat. Finally, Joe spoke. Do you regret it? The career, the life, all of it? Thomas considered the question carefully. I regret the divorce. I regret missing my daughter's childhood. I regret not being a better husband, a better father. But the work itself? He shook his head slowly. No, it needed doing. I was good at it. And the people I saved, like you and your Marines, they got to go home. They got to have lives. That matters. It has to matter, or it's all meaningless. It matters, Joe said with absolute conviction. You matter, and I'm grateful, more than I can say, that you walked into my range today, that I got the chance to say this to your face instead of just thinking it every year. Thank you. For the valley, for the choice you made, for all of it. Thank you. Thomas nodded, accepting the gratitude with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything. You're welcome. AC ton before. Word had spread through the range despite Joe's attempts at discretion. By the time Thomas and Joe emerged from the break room, a small crowd had gathered in the lobby, not pressing close, but present, watching, waiting. Chad approached first, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by genuine humility. Mr. Harker, I wanted to apologize again. Really apologize. I was a dick. I made assumptions based on nothing, on age and stupidity. I'm sorry. Thomas studied the young man for a moment, then extended his hand. Apology accepted. But let me give you something more valuable than an apology, a lesson. Every person who walks through that door has a story. Some were in the military, some were cops, some were just people who learned to shoot from their grandfather. You can't know their story by looking at them, and you definitely can't judge their capability by their age or appearance. Respect costs nothing. Assumptions cost everything. Chad shook his hand gratefully. I'll remember that, sir. I promise. Kyle, the supervisor, stepped forward next. Mr. Harker, if you ever want to shoot here, it's on the house. Lifetime membership, anytime you want, any lane you want. It's the least we can do. That's generous, but unnecessary, Thomas said. It's necessary to me, Joe interjected. And it's my range, so I'm making it policy. You shoot free, forever, non-negotiable. Before Thomas could respond, another man pushed through the small crowd, older, maybe 60, with the bearing of someone who'd worn a uniform. Excuse me, Mr. Harker, I'm David Morrison. I was Army 10th Mountain Division. I just wanted to shake your hand. What you did today, that group at 100 yards, that was a privilege to witness. Thomas shook his hand, and suddenly others were coming forward. A retired police officer who'd heard about the shooting. A competitive shooter who'd been on the pistol range and came to see what the commotion was about. A young woman in Marine Corps athletic gear who'd recognized the look in Joe's eyes and knew instinctively that something important was happening. Each one came forward, shook Thomas's hand, offered their respect. And Thomas accepted each greeting with quiet grace, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding that refusing it would dishonor the gesture. One man, late 50s with scarred hands and a prosthetic leg visible below his shorts, waited until the crowd had thinned. When he approached, his eyes were wet. Sir, he said quietly, I was in Mosul, second tour, 2005. There was a day when my convoy got hit, and someone, we never knew who, provided overwatch that saved our asses. 7 insurgents dropped from positions we couldn't even see, and we made it through. I've always wondered if... He trailed off, unable to finish. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, doing mental calculations. 2nd Infantry Division, Route Tampa, North Sector. The man's breath caught. Yes, sir. How did you... I remember the convoy. I remember the engagement. You had a vehicle with a broken 50 call that you were trying to get operational under fire. That was me, the man whispered. I was the gunner. You saved my life. You saved your own life, Thomas corrected gently. You and your brothers kept fighting, kept moving, kept making good decisions under pressure. I just provided support. No, sir, you provided salvation. The man was crying openly now. I gotta come home. I gotta meet my wife, have my kids, live my life. Even with the leg, even with the nightmares, I got to live. Because of you. Thomas pulled the man into a brief embrace, the kind shared by soldiers who'd seen the elephant and survived. I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you built a good life. When they separated, the man wiped his eyes and stepped back into the small crowd, which had grown quiet and reverent. Joe stood beside Thomas, his hand on the older man's shoulder, and addressed the room. What you've witnessed today is something rare, Joe said. True mastery, true service, true humility. Thomas Harker spent his entire adult life protecting people who would never know his name, never see his face, never understand the decisions he made to keep them safe. He did it without recognition, without medals that could be displayed, without the gratitude that was owed. He did it because it was right, because it was necessary, because someone had to. He turned to look at Thomas. But we know now, we see you now, and we're grateful. The applause started small, one person, then another, and built until the entire lobby was clapping. Thomas stood in the center of it, uncomfortable but accepting, understanding that sometimes you had to let people give what they needed to give. When the applause died down, Thomas spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. Thank you, all of you, but I need you to understand something. I'm not special. I was trained well, practiced hard, and got lucky enough to survive long enough to get good at a difficult job. There are hundreds of people who did the same work, made the same sacrifices, carried the same weight. Most of them, you'll never know their names. They're still out there, still serving, still making impossible choices in impossible situations. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. So, if you want to honor what I did, honor all of them. The ones who came home and the ones who didn't. The ones who can talk about their service and the ones who carry secrets to their graves. Respect the sacrifice. Remember that freedom isn't free, and someone, somewhere, is paying the cost of your safety every single day. The silence that followed was profound. Then David Morrison, the former 10th Mountain Soldier, spoke up. How do we do that, sir? How do we honor them? Live well, Thomas said simply. Build good lives, raise good kids, be kind to strangers, make the world a little better than you found it. That's the only thanks we ever wanted, to know that the people we protected were worth protecting, that they built something good with the life we helped preserve. Joe cleared his throat, thick with emotion. I think we can do that. As the crowd began to disperse, Thomas gathered his equipment. His rifle was clean, properly cased. His brass had been policed, his target retrieved and folded carefully. He moved through the post-shooting routine with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from 10,000 range days just like this one. Joe walked him to the door. Will you come back? Really? I will, Thomas promised. Maybe not every week, but regularly. It's a good range, good people, once they get past their assumptions. Chad's going to be a better man for meeting you today, Joe said. They all will be. I hope so. At the door, Joe stopped him one more time. Tom, I need to ask, what made you choose this range? Out of all the places you could shoot, why here? Thomas was quiet for a moment, then smiled faintly. You want the truth? It was random. I was driving through town, saw the sign, decided to stop. Pure chance. Pure chance, Joe repeated, shaking his head in wonder. 23 years later, pure chance brings you to my range, gives me the opportunity to say thank you. You believe in fate? I believe in probability and coincidence, Thomas said. But sometimes coincidence feels like something more. They shook hands one final time, and Thomas walked out into the afternoon sunlight. The parking lot was half full, cars and trucks belonging to people inside learning to shoot, practicing their skills, hoping they'd never need to use them for real. Thomas loaded his equipment into his truck, a 10-year-old F-150 that had been maintained as carefully as his rifle. Before he started the engine, he sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, thinking about the day, about Chad's assumptions and his apology, about Joe's gratitude and the valley in Helmand, about the man from Mosul who'd gotten to live his life, about all the shots taken and not taken, about the weight that never really went away. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Sarah. "Hey Dad, still on for dinner Sunday? Want to try that new Thai place?" He smiled and typed back, "Sounds good. My treat. Simple. Normal. The kind of interaction that meant more than medals or recognition ever could." He started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot, just another old man driving through town on a Thursday afternoon. The rifle in the back seat was invisible behind tinted windows. The skills in his muscle memory were hidden behind gray hair and weathered skin. The stories in his heart were locked behind operational security and professional discretion. But for one afternoon, at a shooting range on the outskirts of town, those things had mattered, had been seen, had been honored. And that, Thomas thought as he drove toward home, was enough. Closing, Precision Point. Shooting range still operates on the eastern side of town, still draws weekend warriors and serious shooters from 3 counties over. But something changed after that Thursday afternoon in April. Chad Morrison still works the front counter, but he's different now, more thoughtful, more respectful. When elderly shooters come in, he takes extra time, asks about their experience, listens to their stories. He's heard about World War II veterans who learned to shoot on Garands, Vietnam vets who can still field strip an M16 blindfolded, Gulf War soldiers who transitioned to civilian life but never lost the discipline. He keeps a photograph on the wall behind the counter, the target from Thomas Harker's 5 shots, the .63-inch group at 100 yards. Below it, a small plaque. Mastery has no age limit. Joe Castillo added a new component to the range's safety briefing. Every new shooter, before they're allowed on the lanes, hears a short speech about respect, about not judging capability by appearance, about understanding that every person carries stories you don't know, skills you can't see, experiences that shape them in ways you'll never fully understand. The speech ends with, "Respect costs nothing, assumptions cost everything." Some people roll their eyes, some people listen, but everyone hears it, and over time, the culture of the range has shifted. It's more welcoming now, more thoughtful, less tolerant of the kind of casual disrespect that used to pass for normal. Thomas comes back every few weeks, always on weekday afternoons when the range is less crowded. He shoots his 100-yard groups, cleans his rifle, and sometimes stays for coffee in the break room with Joe. They talk about ordinary things, grandkids and retirement and the small challenges of aging. Sometimes they talk about the valley in Helmand, about the impossible shot that became possible, about the weight that both men carry. Once, a young Marine recognized Thomas from a classified briefing about legendary snipers. The Marine approached with awe, asked if Thomas would look at his shooting form, offer some guidance. Thomas spent 2 hours working with him, teaching fundamentals, correcting small errors, sharing wisdom earned through decades in continents and situations that would never make it into training manuals. When the Marine thanked him, Thomas said the same thing he always said: "Pass it on, teach someone else. That's how this works." David Morrison, the former 10th Mountain Soldier, joined the range and became friends with Joe. Sometimes he and Thomas overlap on the same afternoons, and they'll shoot together. 2 men from different wars, but connected by the common experience of serving, surviving, and trying to build good lives after. The man from Mosul, his name was Robert Chen, started a small veteran support group that meets at the range once a month. They shoot, they talk, they help each other carry the weight. Thomas attends sometimes when his presence might help, when someone needs to know that the struggles they face are normal, are survivable, are shared. Sarah, Thomas's daughter, came to visit and asked to see the range. Joe gave her the full tour, showed her the photograph of her father's target group, told her stories about Helmand that Thomas had never shared. She cried, understanding for the first time the magnitude of what her father had done, the lives he'd saved, the sacrifice he'd made. That night at dinner, she asked him about it. Thomas was uncomfortable at first, but Sarah persisted gently, wanting to understand. So he told her some of it, not the classified parts, not the worst parts, but enough to help her see the shape of his service. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said finally. "I wish I'd understood sooner." "I'm proud of you too," Thomas replied. "You built a good life. That's what mattered. That's what it was all for." The shooting range became a kind of pilgrimage site for some. Veterans who heard rumors of the legendary sniper who shot there, people who wanted to see the target on the wall, to shoot on the same range, to connect with something larger than themselves. Joe manages it carefully, protectively. Thomas's privacy is sacred, his peace guarded. But sometimes, when it feels right, Joe will tell the story about the valley, about the choice, about the 31 targets eliminated in 9 minutes and 43 seconds, about the decision to disobey orders because 12 Marines deserve to go home. And people listen, and they understand, and they carry the story forward, because that's what stories are for, to teach us, to connect us, to remind us of what matters. Thomas Harker is 82 now, still shooting, still steady, still carrying the weight of 1,000 decisions made in the spaces between heartbeats. His eyes have faded more, but his hands remain true. His groups are larger now, 1 inch, sometimes inch and a half, but still better than most shooters half of his age will ever achieve. He knows his time is limited, that eventually the eyes will fail completely, the hands will lose their steadiness, the muscle memory will fade. But for now, he shows up, he shoots, he teaches when asked, he carries the stories forward one conversation at a time. And on certain quiet afternoons, when the range is nearly empty and the light slants through the windows just right, you can find him in lane 5 at the 100-yard line. An old man with a rifle, taking his time, breathing slowly, settling into position with the grace of decades. The rifle speaks, the target marks the impact. And somewhere, someone lives who might not have lived without the skills he carried, the choices he made, the weight he bore. That's the legacy of Thomas Harker, not medals or recognition, not gratitude or fame, just the quiet accumulation of moments when precision mattered, when skill saved lives, when one person made the difference between survival and tragedy. In the break room at Precision Point, there's a new tradition. On the anniversary of the Helmand Valley rescue, Joe Castillo raises a coffee, cup, not whiskey, just coffee, and says a simple toast to the ghost, to all of them. The ones who served in silence, the ones who made impossible shots in impossible situations, the ones who came home and kept serving by teaching, by sharing, by remembering. May we live lives worth the sacrifice. And if Thomas is there, he raises his own cup, says nothing, just nods. Because some things don't need words, some weights don't need explanation, some legacies speak for themselves. At 82, Thomas Harker knows he won't live forever. The eyes will fail, the hands will still, the stories will fade into classified archives that few will ever read. But he also knows this: every person he taught, every life he saved, every moment he chose courage over safety, those ripple outward, touching lives he'll never know, creating chains of good that extend beyond his seeing. That's enough, it has to be enough. And on the best days, it is. History forgets the noise, but it remembers the silence that followed. And in that silence, the steady breath before the shot, the moment of absolute focus when everything else falls away. In that silence, men like Thomas Harker live forever, not in monuments or memorial walls, but in the lives they touched, the people they saved, the lessons they taught, the precision they mastered, the weight they carried so others wouldn't have to. The rifle case sits in Thomas's truck. The range waits for his next visit. The stories continue, one shot at a time. And somewhere, a young Marine is learning to breathe correctly, to squeeze rather than pull, to find the space between heartbeats where the world stands still. Learning from someone who learned from someone who learned from Thomas Harker, the chain unbroken, the legacy living, the silence speaking louder than any words ever could. And for all who served in silence and all who carry the weight of precision,